great pleasure on Dashing Dan's Olympic adventures for Aussie Home Loans. I've been trying to get a basketballer, and I've got one of the all-time greats. And, of course, we're here, as I say, for Aussie Home Loans to deal with anyone in Australia. They've got clients in every state and capital. They do Zoom as well, which we are today. Now, this man had an NBA career. He started at Portland. He didn't play at Portland. He went across to Dallas. We'll ask him how that happened and why that happened. Then he ended up at the incomparable Chicago Bulls, post-Michael Jordan era. He had an outstanding career in the NBL. He went to 2 Olympic Games in 2000 as a youngster with a very experienced side, and they finished 4th. Missed 2004, where Australia had a rare poor performance at the basketball and the Boomers. And I think not having this great man there probably played a big part in that, although he'll play it down. And then in 2008, they finished 7th as he was involved in 2 Olympic campaigns. He's now a very respected commentator. He even owns a pub at Trentham, which is not far from Kyneton, sort of in northern Victoria, beautiful part of the world. Cold but magnificent on these winter days, so that makes any sense. Chris Anstey, welcome to Dashing Dan's Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans. Great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me. That's a hell of an intro. And it's been a fun ride so far. And just like you, mate, we look forward to this time every 4 years with a lot of interest, and we profess to know what's going to happen. And in all likelihood, we've probably got no idea. But so they're always fun chats and a lot of excitement around, well, not only the basketball world, but of course, every other sport that participates in the Olympic Games, I'm sure.
Can I take you back 3 years? I remember, and I heard about it later, that Andrew Gaze wasn't going to put his phone up on the desk. You remember they had that show, him and Andrew Marr, and Australia had just won a bronze medal. And Andrew Marr said, no. He calls him Keith, as you know. Got to put your phone on the desk because we want to see it vibrating so much because Australia had just won a bronze medal. I thought that was a special moment, and I thought that was the moment when the Australian men's basketball team had finally arrived. What was your feelings, Chris, after they won that bronze medal, and can they keep that going, you think?
Yeah, I felt the same. There were a lot of messages went around, a lot of old basketball players that night. And I think we all had a sense that this was one we almost expected to win. And, you know, I was trying to, as my, at the time, he must have been a six-year-old son, or he must have been at the time. I think Hunter was 6, but sat around, and we weren't allowed to, but we had people over during COVID because I wanted to share that moment with people close to me, and I wanted to express to them what it meant to not only me, but everyone who'd gone before that group. And when they got that done, you're right. It was a later game. I think the game finished at 10 or 11 o'clock. I would have been up till 3, and everybody knew that everyone was awake if you called them or messaged them. But it was a special time, and moving into these Olympic Games, the thing that I've been really strong on is it doesn't guarantee anything. And I think one thing that we can't expect, we can wish for, but can't expect, or if we don't medal, for it to be a failure. The rest of the world is improving as quickly, if not more quickly, than what we are. And, the team this year has some of those older guys like we had with Gaze and Vlahov and Longley back in 2000. And their young guys are clearly going to play a bigger role than what ours did. But the first challenge is to get out of the pool, and you never want to call a game a must win, but the first game against Spain is incredibly important because in most people's eyes, us and Spain are the weaker 2 teams in that pool. And, you lose to Spain, you come across Canada who are loaded, and then you see Giannis and you're trying to battle for it. You wouldn't want that to happen. So big game against Spain. Love for the basketball community's expectations to be tempered just a little bit because everyone else is going as well as what we are.
Well, at the time of recording this, the games hadn't yet started. The opening ceremony will be tomorrow morning. But by the time this goes to air, the first match won't be far away. Is it the Ball of Death for Australia?
No.
We use that line a lot.
No, that's
probably overused, isn't it?
No, yeah, that's horseshit. Every pool in an Olympic Games is a pool of death. There's probably a couple of teams, you wouldn't mind getting Puerto Rico in a pool, and I think Venezuela might have made it, did they? But even watching a team like South Sudan with their length, I do think they're going to cause some problems. So anytime we get a tough pool, we tend to call it a pool of death, but I don't subscribe to that for a second.
Of course, as you say, it's Greece, Canada, and Spain. Australia with the third most number of NBA players. Canada have got the second most, which just indicates how big the sport is there. We know the USA have got the most. I mean, does that mean anything to have all those NBA players? I suppose it helps, doesn't it?
It speaks to the depth of talent in Australian basketball, but what we don't have is an NBA guy who's the man on his team. We don't have a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. We don't have a Giannis Antetokounmpo. We don't have a Vic Wembanyama. All of our guys are role players, and some of them, in fact, have not played many minutes of competitive basketball over the last couple of years. So that is part of the dilemma for the coaching staff, trying to find a guy who, when the games are on the line, and a lot of these we hope will come down to close finishes because we'll be scrapping a stain. I don't see us blowing teams out, but whose hands do we put the ball in? And it'll be in Josh Giddey's if he's on the floor, but not only whose hands do we put it in, but whose hands does he then put it in to try to hit those big baskets down the stretch. So that's been part of the preparation. That's important, and it's certainly not something where we just look, or another team looks and says we've got to really deal with player X like we do with Giannis in game 3. So that's the tough part. We've got a lot of NBA guys, but not many of them have played one of those absolute number 1 or 2 guy roles on their team. So we'll see. I'll be interested to see who steps up.
Joe Ingles and Paddy Mills still got big roles to play, you think?
Paddy will have a bigger role than Joe. I think Joe will be used sparingly, but we know what he can do. If we need a level head, we get Joe. He's probably a more reluctant scorer than he has been in the past, but I think the thing that happens when Joe's in the game against the right opponent is the offense flows better. The ball moves around side to side and we get everyone involved. So look, it was interesting. I think Paddy, it'll be interesting to see what he does. He struggled a lot in his first couple of practice games and had his big one. Was it against France, or it was one of the other lead-up games. He found his shot. He had 27 odd points. So it's nice to see him find some touch. But one thing, when he pulls on the Australian uniform and it matters, he rarely plays a bad game. So we hope that he plays. We hope that all of the guys are injury-free because they're going to need to be. We hope that Paddy plays like he has in the past when he's worn a Boomers jersey, and we hope the Gorge has got them ticking over defensively because we're going to want to be really tough on that end.
If Ben Simmons was in the team, was he going to be the X factor, or would have been the X factor?
Yeah, he might have been, because he might have blown the team up. That could have been an X factor. Look, I don't think anyone in basketball expects Ben Simmons to ever play for Australia. He's had enough opportunities, so that's part of it. Now, the next part's whether or not people want to play with him, or whether Basketball Australia want to re-invite him. They'll say they will. Gorgeous said he will, but I'm reasonably confident this will be Gorge's last Olympic game. So it'll be up to the next coach, it'll be up to the group, and it'll be up to the young guys. Paddy, Joe, Daly will have moved on. Josh and the younger crew, Dyson and Josh Green as well, will have much bigger roles again. It'll be up to whether or not they see him helping them be successful with the Boomers culture they're trying to build.
Is he selfish, Chris? Or he doesn't understand the concept of team enough?
No, I don't think he's selfish. He hasn't ever promised to do something and not done it. It's his choice. And it's, as an Australian basketball public, we'd always love our best players to play, but it hasn't been something he's either been physically or mentally willing to do. So that's a choice he has. He's made a lot of money playing basketball. Good luck to him.
Chris Anstey's my guest, dual Olympian, one of the greats. He played in the NBA as well when it wasn't that fashionable for Australians to play in the NBA. We've got a lot more talent now, and he was one of our best when he did play. And we're here for Aussie Home Loans for Dashing Down's Olympic adventures. And their areas of expertise include purchasing a property, owner-occupied or investment, building a property portfolio, refinancing, and debt consolidation. Now, you touched on Ben Simmons. With the Opals, for a long time, they were assured of a medal, whether it be silver and then bronze in 5 consecutive Olympic Games. Going back to 2016, I thought that Brendan Joyce was a bit rigid. If you weren't in your WNBA team, you had to be in the camp. If you wanted to stay in the camp with your WNBA team and not be in the camp for the Australian team, you didn't get a Guernsey in the 2016 team. They're unbeaten in the pool matches. They then lost the quarterfinal match narrowly. Of course, there were the problems with Liz Cambage. I think that obviously her attitude and the team didn't help. Can they come back from that, you think?
Yeah, and very much the same. They don't have someone who's an international superstar and takes over a team, but they are very deep and they will be competitive. If you ask me who I thought might end up with a higher place result, I'd probably think the Opals may finish higher than what the Boomers do when it's all said and done and the dust is settled. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing what Lauren Jackson's able to get out of herself one last time. I'm interested in seeing at the other end of the spectrum what Izzy Borlase, how she handles being a part of that. Disappointing news this morning as we record this that Rebecca Allen tore her hamstring and misses. So it'll be interesting to see who they replace her with. But the one thing the Opals haven't had for a long time is a genuine point guard. They still don't. And Jade Melbourne will assume that responsibility to a large extent. Tess Madgen will see a little bit, but they're both guards. They're scoring guards. They're not necessarily genuine point guards. So look, that's been an area that has been an Achilles heel in their inability, I think, to medal as often or be quite as competitive. But the team they've put together, I think, can compete. Very much like the men on paper, the USA team looks like they'll just walk over everybody and win comfortably. But let's see.
She's a superstar, Lauren, but is there a hint of desperation? With the greatest respect to her, that at 43, they've said you can come and play, and they've put all these plans in place, such as making sure that her boys are there because she can't be without them, and other family support, that they've really bent over backwards to get her there, that maybe there's a feeling of desperation, as I said earlier?
I don't know if it's desperation. It's probably opened a can of worms, or if I was another Opals player or a Boomer with young children, I'd wonder why that wasn't afforded to me. But I don't think it's desperation. I think Lauren made herself available again after you mentioned Liz Cambage was done and dusted, and she's been able to turn the culture of that Opals not single-handedly, but been a part of turning that culture around again. And at the World Cup in Sydney was one of the best games I've seen in a game that mattered from her. So she'll have a smaller role. She'll be important to have around the group, but she'll willingly hand over her role to someone younger. But as it is at the moment, we've got a lot of combo guards and wings in Australian basketball. We don't, and forwards, we don't have many true centers. And many young true centers. So hopefully someone will emerge over the next 2 or 3 years to fill Lauren's shoes, but they're as big a shoes as anyone's in international basketball to fill.
How many minutes would you expect her to play, or will it be on a needs-by-needs basis for the coach, Sandy Brondello?
Yeah, just that. I think they'll find rest for her when they can. I wouldn't think she'd play more than 10 or 15 minutes a game, sort of that 3-4 minute, a quarter type role, but they wanted to have some juice at the end when it matters, in case she was required to play 25 minutes in a final or a medal game. So I'm sure they'll manage her as best they can. The draw's pretty good. It's every third day. It's not every second day. So, she's a pro. She knows her body, and they'll make sure that they don't empty the tank early on.
Now, Chris, when you played, there was a country that was right up there, and they took the USA all the way, didn't they? In 2000, and nearly beat them in the battle for semi-final. They lost by 1 point and had a chance virtually on the buzzer to beat the USA, which would have been a great result. Lithuania, second Olympic Games in a row they haven't qualified. Why for so long were they so good, and why do you think they've fallen off the perch a bit?
Oh, look, I think you just have a group of talented basketball players. I mean, they're a country of, last time I looked, 3 million people who have battered. We always talk about punching above our weight, and then we look at Lithuania and say they're a powerhouse. We've got 10 times more people than what they've had. So they just had a really core group of players that they stuck with and went through a number of Olympic cycles, and that shared experience made them incredibly tough to beat internationally. One of the best games of basketball I was ever involved in was the only time at that stage we'd beaten Lithuania, and it took a lot, and we were great, and it was so memorable. Europe, 12 teams in the Olympic Games tournament, the number of talented players. You mentioned how many NBA players we've got. The amount of international NBA players continues to grow, and other teams have caught up and gone past Lithuania. So they'll find a way back. They'll end up with a superstar at some stage who'll do to their country what Luka Doncic has done for Slovenia, I'm sure. But who knows when that will be.
Chris Anstey is my guest on Dashing Down's Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans, and they've got over 25 lenders on their panel. We touched on Lithuania, of course, talking about how strong they were in 2000, and you were in your first Olympic Games in 2000, and you were with the great Andrew Gaze, who carried the flag out, the typical Andrew Gaze. He was the dag going out. He's still the dag today. What was it like playing with him in his last Olympic Games? That was a pretty good team, that Australian team that ended up fourth. Do you think that they overachieved a bit because it was at home?
No, I don't think so. I think we expected to win a medal, and one of the internally that was the goal, as it has been with today's Boomers, and we thought we were a chance. And when you finish fourth, and then you're the only team of the four that doesn't walk away with a medal, it's heartbreaking. And we've done it, I think, 4 times as a male basketball nation. So. It goes from a great sense of joy walking into a stadium with the team and being up the front as you walk in because Andrew was the flag bearer, to it becoming one of the more disappointing moments in your basketball career 2 weeks later when you don't win that medal. And no, look, it's the Olympic Games goes quickly, and you learn a lot in your first Olympic Games. It was interesting. I never knew how much the opening ceremony took out of you. We had a 2-day break with that one, but I knew that when I got to Beijing 8 years later, I wasn't going to do the opening ceremony. It was an 8-hour ordeal. We played the next day, and Andrew Bogut and I couldn't convince the rest of the team to not do the opening ceremony. And, we'd beaten Croatia twice in the lead up. And, as we were watching the opening, as Bogut and I were watching, and I think Dave Anderson might have stayed back as well. We were watching the opening ceremony from our room on TV, and you look downstairs and the Croatian team's doing walkthroughs and stretching, and we're like, shit, this is going to be on tomorrow. They cracked us. And that's the biggest distraction at an Olympic Games, are the Olympic Games themselves. And I think our nation and our teams have figured that out. And it was interesting. My point was going to be, it was interesting to hear that less than 25% of athletes to go to the opening ceremony. It's just too much. It's not ideal preparation for your game. You'd never do it in any other major tournament, to go and be on your feet for so long. So I think just watching the opening ceremony this year is going to be a very interesting thing to see what it actually looks like.
Well, I spoke to Tom Craig, who's one of the kookaburras and the men's hockey team for Dashing Down's Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans, Chris. And he said he wasn't going to do it because they play the next day. But of course, one of the all-time greats, and he thoroughly deserves it, Eddie Ockenden is the male flag bearer. Jess Fox is the female flag bearer at 4th Olympic Games, the slalom canoe champion. But Eddie's going to do it. So I wonder how many of the male hockey players will be there to support him, knowing they're playing the next day. Because as you say, it can be a distraction, can't it?
Yeah, and especially, imagine as a flag bearer, the emotional drain it has on you and all the extra commitments they're going to ask you to do. So, look, it is. I wouldn't do it. I didn't do it in Beijing. On top of everything else, these Olympic Games are so spread out over France. They're not the Paris Games, they're spread out all over France. So there's a lot who geographically just can't get there, including, the Boomers. They're in Marseille, I think, aren't they? Or they're up north somewhere. So no, it's just a tough one. You kind of got to when you're the flag bearer, don't you? And then you'd want to support your teammate. But I reckon the best way you can support your teammate is if he's exhausted the next day, go and help him win round one and work on towards a medal.
So by the time you got to the Olympic Games in 2000, you've had experience with the NBA. How much did that help you? And what standard was the Olympic Games compared to the NBA? Was it very similar? And was that also an assistance to you in your first Olympic Games, having, of course, played at the highest level with Dallas and then, of course, with Chicago?
A different style of play, but probably I'd improved a lot from being over there. The game slows down a bit, and I was probably more used to competing against those type of bodies. My role wasn't big in Sydney. We had until Luke got injured. We had Mark Bradke as well, and Barry Barnes. Was very well known for playing the older guys and the guys that have been around for a long time. So a lot of us young guys didn't see the court that often, and that's probably the hardest part of an Olympic Games is, when you're just getting used to that role and making sure you compete when you come in and trying to understand what that is. But no, look, I think it's like any basketball journey, isn't it? The older you get, the more you know, the better you tend to compete until your body starts saying, you've done enough. We're going to start slowing down on you. So, I moved as well as I had in that one, but I reckon I was a lot better player 8 years later when I got to Beijing.
What was so good about Andrew Gaze? I mean, even at the age of 35, I mean, he's one of the best defensive players, one of the best shooters this country's ever seen. He could just produce when he had to, couldn't he?
I think that's it. His offensive game is as strong as anyone's, in the history of Australian basketball. What he's been able to do on the Olympic stage is sort of what Paddy Mills is doing now. He always found a way. He was fearless in his ability to score the ball, and won a lot of games, especially when we didn't have the depth around him, that he sort of put the team on his shoulders and carried the scoring load. A lot of guys will argue that they carried the defensive load behind him and helped him out a lot. But no, look, I think he scored more Olympic points than maybe everyone other than Oscar Schmidt, perhaps, or maybe the most. But those sort of statistics just tell the story, don't they?
Absolutely. In 2004, that was frustrating for you. The team only won one game and you were injured. Were you close to playing, or was it just a battle against time?
To be honest, I can't remember what my injury was, but I didn't watch. I couldn't bring myself to watch the games, and I got ruled out. It's amazing how you handle things. I went and took a holiday, and I was really disappointed to not be a part of it. Found a way to catch up and watch later on. But when you hear that they're struggling, and you feel in your gut, you think you could have helped. Maybe I couldn't have, but I was playing pretty good basketball after my 3 years in Russia by then, and I believed I could have helped. And that was probably the hardest part, knowing that I could have if I was there, and wasn't able to be there because of injury. And it was a tough one.
The game had changed, hadn't it? Because obviously the place to go overseas to play your trade had been the NBA, probably still is, but there were some darn good international competitions like Russia. How much did that help your basketball, Chris?
Yeah, as much as anything, it was the off court, getting rid of people who would do anything for you and being more dependent on yourself. But, they were the toughest 3 basketball years of my life, and probably the 3 I played improved the most and probably had the best results. Really set me up to come home to Australia. The thing was, there was no social media back then. There were no games televised. So I've got these 3 years of basketball that I had that I enjoyed and played really well, that no one will ever see, because I'm not even sure the recordings exist. But that was a lot of fun. Really improved a lot over there. And, to come home knowing how much I'd improved and maybe surprise a few people when I got back to the Tigers, who were meant to be rebuilding, but we found a way to win the championship our first year back. So, tough years, and a lot of really, really good European players, to your point, that, even to this day, some choose to stay in Europe and have bigger roles with the same sort of money, as opposed to choosing not to go to the NBA, and they have been for a long time.
Is that because the NBA, as you say, is all encompassing? It's sometimes just too much. You don't really have a life.
Sometimes it's roles. Sometimes you make more money in Europe than what you would in the NBA. So it's a legitimate choice. You've got guys in Europe making $4 or $5 million a year and choosing to stay there, because in the NBA, there'd be a smaller salary, smaller roles. I think, why not stay at home? I think that's one thing Americans are very insulated to, that even they're not quite sure how good European basketball is until they really go and have a look. And it's why Team USA, even with the team they put on paper this year, as much as everyone thinks they're unbeatable, I think teams will get closer than what people think.
So could this be the first one where someone we know that Lithuania, we've discussed it already, got very close in 2000. This might be the one where they may not win. I mean, we expect the women to win. They just keep dominating. We'll get to them in a second as to why they're so good. And even though there's some darn good female countries as well, like Australia, like France, etc. But with the men, the other countries are getting better and better all the time, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. Canada's example of that. South Sudan may be the best one the last 4 years, but you can tell how seriously the USA are taking it with the type of rosters they're putting together now. So, they've been beaten in world championships and World Cups, and they understand that if they don't send teams like this, they are beatable. It's going to be interesting to see who can beat a team like this if they can. So, again, there's a lot of storylines, a lot of reasons to watch this tournament. It'll be fascinating.
You got to the 2008 Olympic Games. You played in that. You were one of the veterans in the team, but there had been a major change. There were a lot of new players. Paddy Mills was new, of course, now in his fifth Olympic Games in Paris. Joe Ingles was new also in his fifth Olympic Games. Players like Saville, Worthington. So it was a different sort of team, wasn't it? Did you underachieve in finishing seventh?
I think that was, again, it came down to that game against Croatia. By the end of the tournament, we were playing as well as we had. We beat Lithuania by 30, but because of that loss, we crossed over against the US, and they got us. And we were competitive against the US for the first half, and Kobe Bryant went nuts in the third quarter, and we didn't have an answer for that. So it shows you how important each of the games are in the pools, even if A, to get out, but B, to get as good a crossover as you can. So Andrew, that was sort of Andrew Bogut's coming out tournament as well. He'd played in 2000, but that was where he was really an international presence and someone who knew he could dominate a game. But no, that was a really, the same thing, was a fun experience as well. Disappointing with that first game, but a very different feel to what 2000 was. But you can see the sort of, Paddy Mills in some of his first games, what he was able to do and how he was able to compete against the USA straight out of St. Mary's College. I think everyone started to see glimpses of what he might be able to do, and we've clearly seen that now for 4 Olympic Games.
I mean, Chris, you've got to beat everyone, but I suppose I get the impression when you watch the basketball, let's try and stay away from the USA until the medal rounds. And if you can do that, you're right in the mix, because everyone else is pretty even, aren't they? And I mean, we've just touched on the fact that, and they're starting to catch up with the USA, but you'd still, if you had a choice, you'd prefer to miss them until the whips are cracking near the end of the tournament, wouldn't you?
Yeah, or to get them real early and get out of the pool and not see them again, as you say. So, agree. It's hard to manipulate that sort of thing in a tournament. The Boomers tried to do that with Lamanis one game where we lost the last game, and the shit hit the fan. He got in all sorts of trouble, but I had no problem with it. I thought it was, he gave us what they considered the best possible chance to win a medal. We didn't end up winning it, but we gave ourselves the best chance by not crossing over against the USA. And, it just sort of shows, everyone will say you should try to win every game, but sometimes you got to look at a bigger picture. But hard to manipulate, but if you can, or if you had a wish, you'd absolutely want to avoid them.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you mentioned Kobe Bryant. There's a great documentary. I've seen most of it so far. The 81-point game, of course, his tragic death in 2020. A lot of his teammates talk about that, but they talk about that game against Toronto Raptors, where he shot 81 points. What was it like playing against him, Chris? I mean, why was he so special?
He's talented. His work rate was fantastic, and to play against him, I sort of got him when he was with Shaquille O'Neal, so you can imagine trying to deal with that. It almost seemed impossible for the sort of team we were and the sort of physical ability I had. So I didn't see many minutes against him, but no, he was one of the most talented players I've ever seen.
Chris Anstey's joined me on Dashing Down's Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans, a dual Olympian. He also played in the NBA, played in Russia, and a great career in the NBL as well. And we're here for Aussie Home Loans, whose areas of expertise include pre-approvals, first home buyers, equipment loans, car loans, and also personal loans. Now, as I said, you were picked pick 18 by Portland, but you didn't really get to spend much time in Portland, Chris, because I think you were on traded pretty quickly to Dallas. How did that happen? And how did you feel about that?
5 minutes later, I had no idea. I put a Portland jersey on. I got a phone call 5 minutes later saying, take it off, put a Dallas one on. So that was about it. I had no idea. And it had been a predetermined choice made before draft day between Portland and Dallas. And I guess they took Calvin Cato and I ended up in Dallas. So nothing to it other than the fact that there was a phone call 5 minutes after I got drafted.
So how'd you feel about that? Even though Portland had picked you up, but you weren't really going to go to Portland. It was all just part of a plan to get what they needed to get.
I didn't. I was just so naive. I knew I was where I wanted to, with the team that wanted me. Didn't understand it. Was naive, and all I knew was when I got on a plane, I was heading to Dallas. I'd never been to either town or either city, so wherever I went was going to be different. And I didn't have a prep. All I knew was if it all went well, I was going to get drafted with the last pick of the first round. But I actually didn't get that far, which was surprising.
And what was the Dallas experience like?
Yeah, great. It was. eyes wide open. You realize you're not as good as what you thought you were in the NBL, and you've got to go and get a lot better. Love the town, love some of the players I played with, and it was an accelerated learning experience. And you realize, like I said, you got a lot of work to do, and clearly didn't get to exactly where I needed to be. Got traded to Chicago, which was the team who was going to draft me in the first place, and spent my year there. And after that, I didn't get offered another contract. I sort of chose to come back, play in the Olympic Games in Sydney, and wasn't able to be there all off season, and may or may not have jeopardized another small contract. But glad I made the choice and had my 3 years in the NBA and then moved on.
Tell me about Chicago. It was post Michael Jordan. Was his presence still there when you turned up at the Chicago Bulls? Of course.
Yeah, the trophies sit there, the banners hang in the rafters. He turns up every now and again, but I think the thing was, you realize how great the Chicago sporting fans were to give us, would have the patience with us. I think they understood. They didn't want that team to break up, but when they did, they understood it wasn't our fault, and they supported us. We were a horrible team. Everybody had their own agenda. We're good human beings, but I think everyone saw it as an opportunity to grow their own opportunity, and we're on track to be one of the worst teams in the history of the game, and ended up winning only about 20 games. I think maybe it was 18. So it was a long, long year. When you go through, a month and you don't win a game, it's tough. So again, you deal with a lot of adversity, you grow. And then at the end of the day, you realize the business involved with them trying to build a franchise, understanding who they want to build around.
So just on that, you play so many games. One game just rolls into another. When you go through a patch like that and you don't win for over a month, and that might be 12, 14 games, somewhere like that, do you keep going, Chris?
It's your job. You're getting paid millions of dollars to do it. And having said that, though, it's long, but you go through a process and you find successes on something that's not the scoreboard. You find improvement of practice. You find improvement in a teammate. You add a defensive set, or you try something new, and you get better physically, whatever it might be. But at the end of the day, you try to get close and put yourself in games. Even if you don't win it, then you believe that eventually that it'll turn. And you see that in the AFL. You see what Hawthorn have been able to do this year, to some extent what North Melbourne have been able to do, that if they only measured success with wins and losses, everyone fails by the end when you got one premier. So you got to find a way to genuinely measure success, and it doesn't always have to be winning and losing games of sport.
So do you think if Australia doesn't make the semis this year or doesn't win a medal, but because we've got, as you say, a lot of young guys who are still finding their way in the sport, if there's discernible improvement in them, it's a reasonably successful campaign? Same with the women as well.
Yeah, I think getting out of the pool for the Boomers is a success, and anything other than that's a bonus. That's where we sit globally at the moment. You want to put yourself in an opportunity to play in a quarterfinal and take a swing at someone. That if we get to that stage, I would consider this successful. And again, it's about aligning the basketball public, because now we've won a medal, and the group stated they always want to compete for a medal. It doesn't mean it just happens, and it doesn't mean we fail if we don't. It'll be disappointing, but it's just really important to keep some perspective on how good the rest of the world's going too.
Because they need to be admired. I know it was 5 years in between games with COVID. 2016, they had done everything right. They were about to win that medal, and then they had it taken away from them in the last 10 seconds. Basketball, 10 seconds, isn't it?
With that bad call against Spain. Yeah, absolutely.
Correct. Yeah, and they managed to get back on the horse. There was also a bit of controversy in the World Championships as well, and they missed out in the bronze. The team changed a bit in personnel, but there's still a lot of the same guys there. They obviously galvanised to make sure that it didn't happen again. So they need to be applauded for that, don't they?
Yeah, they do. And what they were able to do, and you've got to wait a long time to make up for it, of course. It's 4 years to carry. That's a long, long time, and things can go wrong in a tournament. So, yeah, no, look, what they were able to achieve was incredible. It turned out to be 5 years, didn't it, by the time the Olympics rolled around. So what they did was incredible. again, it's sort of that going through something together, that shared experience that, you know, you see the New York Knicks doing it, you see Melbourne Storm have done it, the Boomers have done it now, and the transition period while you still got the guys who've shared those experiences, integrating the new young kids is really important, and hopefully they're, even though they weren't a part of it, they're understanding what it meant, and I think they are. So no, it was. I mean, all of us boomers at one. Yeah, we're so happy that that was able to happen. At the same time, you kind of still wish you were a part of it when it did.
And the Opals were the same too. And they have, as I said earlier, and Chris Anstey's my guest for Dashing Down's Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans, champion Australian basketball, went to 2 Olympic Games, because they won 4 silvers and then a bronze. There were a lot of players that were lucky enough to play in a lot of those. Christy Harrow was one of them. Penny Taylor played a lot, and Lauren Jackson too. But there were still changes within that team, within the roster, in that during those 5 Olympic Games, that the team was still able to gel and keep being up there and basically being the second best team to America.
Yeah, look, we had probably the second best domestic or talented domestic league in the world, and it showed. We had our girls playing in the WNBA in numbers that outweighed the men in the NBA. So yeah, we were at that level, and the WNBL was at that level. And you're right, the depth of talent we had, we just beat teams on talent oftentimes as the women's game was growing in other countries. But same sort of thing, the women's game is growing globally, and other teams' improvement is accelerated because they're coming from a long way further back. And our challenge is to remain one of the top 2, 3, 4 nations in the world. No matter what programs you have, no matter where you're from, sometimes it only takes one exceptionally talented human being to change the fortunes of an entire nation's trajectory. You know, Luka Doncic. We had Lauren Jackson, one of the greatest basketball players in the history of the game. And she's been around now for 25 years or so. So like we won't have her moving forward. So again, we see who that next one might be.
I mean, the sport in this country's gone from being, it's still a great pastime sport, particularly in the southeastern suburbs. There was a basketball stadium in every corner, of course, around Dandenong and in that part of the world, to a sport where we've got so many very, very good players. Why do you think that's happened, Chris? And has the local competition, the NBL and the WNBL, even though it's probably not as good as it was, as you just touched on, but have they played a significant role in that, in making sure that we are pretty strong at international level?
Yeah, look, I think there are more eyes in our league now, and so more younger people playing it. But again, you know, the sport, like most do, they tend to spend more time and resources on grassroots level. You know, that's where the money is for the sports. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get the ones coming out the pointy end. So if you look at most of the guys in our team this year, it has been through them going away to the COE or going away to college or away to the NBA to put the finishing touches or on the pointy end of their career. We haven't really done that as a nation domestically yet. So look, it's the sport's popular. It's sort of outside my realm of expertise as to what it needs or anything like that. And I kind of enjoy not being a part of that anymore. But we've just got to make sure we continue to find programs where the really, really talented ones are treated a little bit differently and taken out of mainstream programs, because it's what the other nations do. But we always want to sort of knock down the really talented ones and not give them preferential treatment. We've got to give them preferential treatment, train them a little bit differently, and make sure it'll give everyone the opportunity to reach their ceiling.
One of the main reasons why I think Australia's been so good for so long is they've had some great coaches, and one of them is the almost incomparable Brian Goorjian. Had so much success coaching in the NBL, winning premierships or championships left, right and centre. He had that defensive bent about his coaching, and you had him as a youngster. He's still got that defensive bent now, but he's still able to relate, isn't he? He's still relevant.
Yeah, look, the best thing he's always done is been able to get guys to play together. And it's as simple as that. You know, put them in situations to succeed, get them to play hard, and get them to buy in. And sometimes it's that simple. It's maximizing potential. So you'd always think a team that Gorge has will figure out what they're capable of, whatever that might be. And no, you're right. He's been the most successful might not even be basketball coach, it might be coach. That he may be one of the most successful coaches in Australian sporting history. In conversation with guys like Craig Bellamy and those sort of, Eddie Jones and the hockey coach, whose name escapes me off the top of my head. Look, he's one of the greatest of all time, and he won't be doing it forever. And it's it was special to be. It was special to have him sort of take the reins of a lot of us young guys when we're young and develop the habits that we consider normal that most people don't.
And does it work that Sandy Brondello has an WNBA team and also an Australian team, and at times it impacts on a commitment?
Yeah, it does. It would be great to have more access to the girls. It would cost a fortune to get the entire team over to the USA to do a camp as opposed to flying one person back, or in fact not having the head coach present. So it's got to impact it a little bit. I don't know. Again, I don't know what her coaching aspirations are or how long she'll go for with the Opals, but you sort of sit back and you got Shannon Seaborn, who I think is one of the best coaches of women in a long, long time as an assistant. I would like to think that he'd be the next in line, and I hope they reward someone like him when it's time, as opposed to someone politically that they might just pick a name or more experience or whatever it might be. But he's an incredible coach of women.
Why is he so good? What's a couple of key factors that stand out for you?
Oh, look, he gets it. He relates. He gets it. He's up to date with all international global trends. Again, he finds a way to have teams reach their potential. I mean, winning the championship with Townsville, finding ways to junior World Cups, World Championships. He's done a great job.
Now, you mentioned Andrew Bogut. Was he the best player you played with the Boomers, and why was he so good?
I don't know. I'd never like to say one's better than another. I mean, his competitiveness was one thing. He had that chip on his shoulder from the time he was a young kid and wanted to prove people wrong, and was able to do that. Don't know who the best would be. There have been so many great teams. I mean, I think someone like Sam McKinnon's completely underrated in this conversation, where he'd play alongside some of the Gazers and Bradkeys, and then he'd be given the best player on the other team to defend. He rebounded out of his position. I think he's one of the best wing rebounders and defenders in the world at the time, but no one was measuring that. They were measuring how many points people scored. But there's a lot of great players that probably haven't got the accolades that some of those more highly regarded or highly publicized players do.
You think they talk more about the points because the NBA is so big and that's such an attacking form of basketball compared to the NBL and compared to obviously the international matches where defense plays a huge role?
Yeah, I mean, it's the easiest stat to count, but it's the one they put on the scoreboard, and it's the one that's most important to most people. It's as simple as that.
Now, Chris, you got into basketball late at the age of 17, but at the age of 15, you were ranked the second best Australian tennis player in this country behind a bloke called Mark Philippoussis. When you played Mark Philippoussis, how long were the rallies? Because with the greatest respect,
no, they were
you
short.
two gentlemen, you were serving volleys. Is that correct? And you would have liked playing on the grass.
They were short. It's no, look, it's really interesting, that old tennis thing. It's you still hear people talk about how overrated Philippoussis was or how he never achieved his potential. I'd argue that he probably, as a junior, he had a pretty rough pathway. He was very talented, but you wouldn't have picked him to be a Wimbledon finalist or to win that game against Pete Sampras at the Australian Open. The things he was able to do in tennis for us young kids who grew up around him a little bit were pretty incredible and should be celebrated a lot more than what they probably are.
He was a very good player. He was a bit misunderstood, do you think? Is that an accurate term?
Yeah, look, he had a really hard upbringing, and I'll probably leave it at that. But to get out of that and to do what he's done, you can understand why he behaved like he did at times. You can understand why he was inconsistent. You just wish him all the best, and I think he's in a really good place now.
Why did you get out of the tennis and concentrate in the basketball? Because you got into it pretty late at the age of 17.
Yeah, I just found myself in a game of basketball one day. I didn't think I was going to make it as a tennis player. When it was all said and done, after I found basketball, I enjoyed being a part of a group. I enjoyed being somewhere where my height was an advantage, not a disadvantage. And the longer I played, I realized pretty quickly that, I could probably do some of the things that the players I was watching could do. I'd never done it, but my improvement was pretty quick, but I worked my ass off. I was always really proud of how hard I worked because I was coming from so far behind. And no, look, it just sort of happened. I only ever committed to keep playing as long as I was still improving, and I kept improving.
When did you know that you were pretty good at this?
Probably not until my third or fourth year in the NBL. It took playing for Brian Gorgon and playing with that coaching staff to instill that work rate in me, strengthen my body up a lot. And, there's a lot of young players now, if they don't play many minutes, they go and change teams. I moved from the Tigers to train harder. And then even after my first year of playing 2 minutes a game, I played 5 a game my first year at the Magic, 10 a game in the second. So, 3 years into my professional basketball career, I'd averaged about 7 minutes a game. And I think a lot of people tend to forget that, but I knew the work I was putting in. I knew I'd come out of it a better player than going to somewhere else who said they'd play me 20 minutes a game but not get any better and be out of the league and just be a role player for the next however many years. So it took a long time. It probably took until that 1996 year to figure out I could compete. And again, I just kept improving.
And obviously the opportunity then to go to the NBA, you don't look a gift horse in the mouth, do you, Chris? Because that's probably where,
exactly,
particularly in those days, all the budding young basketballers wanted to go, and they wanted to be NBA stars, didn't they?
Yeah, I'd never aspired to go to the NBA, but I got drafted. Didn't know much about it. So I love the fact that I was naive as a young player. And, like I said, it came about pretty quickly. In a perfect world, I would have probably been better suited to have another year or two here and improving again for another 2 years. But like you say, you can't say no when the offer comes around. Put a big red line through your name and say you don't want it. So did the best I could over there. And it's, as I've sort of mentioned, I'm pretty comfortable that I found out how good I could become as a basketball player.
Now, your daughter Izzy is going really well. She's in America playing college basketball.
She's just graduated, so she's back home. So she got back home a couple of weeks ago and settling back into Melbourne, got herself a job, and she'll figure out if she wants to play basketball again. So she's stepped away from it for a little while. She's got herself a real job. And look, her experience was fantastic. She met great people. I was really happy I could be there for her graduation and her senior night. And her basketball journey's been very different to mine, and that global experience and the education she's got, they'll be invaluable for the rest of her life.
If she wanted to go pro, obviously she'd have your support and her mother's support, the great Lindley Frame as well. But obviously you don't mind whatever she wants to do. It'll be up to her.
Yeah.
Pushing it too much.
Yeah, look, I mean, even when she went to college, and I think I was lucky when I played. If I did my ACL and never played the game again, I wouldn't have cared. I would have found something else that I enjoyed. And when Izzy went to college, number one was life experience, number two was education, number three was basketball. If it was flipped the other way, you're bound to fail. You're bound to be miserable. Whether or not she chooses to play it again, that's up to her. She's happy. There's a lot of players I saw who, when I was young, we always knew they weren't going to be extremely successful, but they pushed and they pushed and they pushed. And everyone will say, don't give up. And they probably started their career 6 years too late. So I'm proud that Izzy started her career now. And she's not going to, trudge through mud if she doesn't want to do it for 2 or 3 years before she starts her career. So I reckon she'll have a head start on a lot of people who may not recognize where they need to be as quickly as what Izzy has.
So if a budding young basketball or budding young sports person who has the opportunity of becoming elite at their sport, they've got a lot of God-given talent, came to you, what would be the first piece of advice you'd give to them?
Talk to someone who knows you. None of my business what they do. It's every situation is different. No, I would refer them to someone who knew them and not give them any advice at all. I think every situation is different.
Now, you're still in the media. We still hear you from time to time talking about the NBA, talking about the NBL, but you also have gone into the hospitality business. You've got a pub in Trentham, which is up near Kyneton, and it's just called the Trentham Hotel. When I say just, it's a magnificent pub, beautiful part of the world. What made you go into that area of work, Chris, and into the hotel business?
But yeah, I've got a couple. So I got one in Melbourne called Arco Bar in Heatherton as well. And now look at the people I was doing it with. It's always been my answer. People said, "What are you going to do next?" I said, "Ask me who I'm doing it with." So this opportunity came about, and it's a people business. And I've always enjoyed the people around sport. I wanted to get out of basketball and sort of, instead of being in that inner circle, be in that next ring out where all the people who like the sport and like a beer and like being social fit. So it's been fun connecting with people in that space, fun connecting with new people, learnt lots. So no, I've enjoyed it. It's been an itch for a little while. I nearly did it a decade or so ago, but it was the right opportunity. As you say, it's a great place of the world. I love being there. You know, I stay up there quite a bit now, and couldn't find a better local community. But so I've got two. Hopefully, we'll end up with another one or two, and we'll see what we can make out of this.
If I was to turn up at the Trentham Hotel, which, as I say, is only 15 minutes from Kyneton, where my kids are, and I go there quite a bit, what would be the dish you would recommend for me on a cold winter's night, Chris, which I've had plenty of in this?
I'll tell you what, we're real different to most country pubs. We've got an extensive menu because we want our locals to feel they can come back more than one night and charge appropriately. You know, there's a lot of country pubs who become destination or gastro pubs that don't really serve the locals as well as perhaps they could, because they price themselves out of multiple visits. We're trying to do the other way. So we've got an extensive menu so they don't get sick of the same thing. I go to the grilled Creole barramundi. I like that one, but we've got our parmas, we've got our steaks, we've got our burgers, we've got all the normal pub food, but we also do a little bit more, and we try not to take the piss on the prices so that it's affordable to come through, you know, as many times as you like.
And what about your beloved Western Bulldogs, which are my beloved Western Bulldogs?
Yes.
Well, they drive us mad, mate, don't they?
You know what? We're just saying off air. It's an incredibly even season, and I get a bit sick and tired of all the conversation around Luke Beveridge and why he should be fired. As far as I'm concerned, he's the best coach the Bulldogs have ever had. He bought us a premiership, and he continues to be able to compete. He's a little bit crazy, but you need to be a bit different, I think, to succeed when you don't have I don't think we've got one of the best 6 or 8 lists in the league. When you get past probably 14, 15, I think we tail off a little bit. And I think what we've been able to do with the list we've had is about where we deserve to be. And I think he's probably found a way to, he stole one, nearly got us another one. And, I've got every confidence that he's the guy to turn this around again. Whether we make the finals again this year or not, I don't know. But I tell you what, of all years, it's sort of shaping up like it might be a 2016 year for someone, not necessarily us, but it feels like a team like Hawthorn or a team like Collingwood or a team like Melbourne could, if they found their way in, or us, you could win a few finals and find yourself in a prelim.
Fremantle's another one. I mean, you've got to remember with Luke Beveridge, and the Bulldogs have had many years where they've lost more games than they've won. They had 1 year where they've lost more games than they've won, and that was 2018. So it is a darn good record. Before I let you go, as I said, the sport's been great chatting to you for Aussie Home Loans, for Dashing Down's Olympic Adventures. I'll put your head on the chopping block in a nice way. Gold, silver and bronze in the men's and women's tournament, Chris, which as we speak, just getting underway.
Yeah, probably, as much as I'd love not to, I still think the USA will win. Canada and France, I think, will fight out for the podiums. The women, the US will win. And to be honest, I haven't seen enough of the European teams to have a prediction as to what they might be like. I've seen the Opals. I've seen not much of the rest, so I don't actually know what we're up against, but I'm looking forward to watching their first game in a couple of nights, Melbourne time, Monday, 7:00. By the time people are listening to this, it's almost ready to go. So I've made sure that the Opal games are set in my calendar, just like the Boomers are, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they're up against.
So make sure we don't contact you when the Opals and the Boomers are playing. Is that right?
It might be the best time to contact me. I won't be working.
The great Chris Anstey's joined me, one of the all-time greats in the world of basketball. It's been wonderful catching up with him. We deal with anyone in Australia. Aussie Home Loans, our major sponsor on Dashing Down's Olympic Adventures. They've got clients in every state and capital. They do Zoom as well. Areas of expertise include purchasing a property, owner-occupied or investment, building a property portfolio, refinancing, debt consolidation, cash out, construction, pre-approvals, first home buyers, equipment loans, car loans, personal loans, any loan you like. And they've got over 25 lenders on their panel. Thanks so much, Chris, for joining us, and enjoy the basketball, and good luck with the pub.
Will do. Thanks, Dan. See you, mate.
Thanks, mate. That was great.
You're more than welcome. I do have to run. I've got to get on another meeting, actually, right at 12 o'clock, so your timing's perfect.
All right, mate, and I'll cut out the Slovenia thing. I got confused, but that's okay.
Yeah, no dramas at all.
All right, mate. All the best.
All the best. You too, mate. Catch up.
See you, mate. Bye. Bye.